leadership's a journey. If you had told me when I was a little cowgirl, a tomboy, growing up in upstate New York in a little town with no traffic lights, that someday I would be sitting here talking to all of you in California virtually about almost 3 decades of experience, I would have said, oh yeah, right. I mean, there's no way. I mean, I would not even be able to envision that. I grew up in a very small town. It still has no traffic lights. My brother's the mayor. He gets paid $2,500 a year to be the mayor, and I keep reminding him that means that's a volunteer job. But and my parents still have my childhood home, and I love that part of my life and that part of my journey because it was such a foundation for values. I wanted to be a physical education teacher. I already had my life planned. I was going to live in the gym for my entire life, coach girls, play sports. And then my mother read in the newspaper in my junior year in 1976 that the president of the United States had made a decision and changed the policy on allowing women to go into the military academies. And I can see my mom sitting on that gold plaid couch reading the newspaper. And she says, "This sounds just like you." And I looked around the room and there was no other you in the room, just me. My brother wasn't in the room. My sisters were in the room. And I'm thinking, Mom, you go to all my games. You go to all my sports. What part of, being a coach and going to be a physical education teacher have you missed? Because Army, like West Point or Academy, I don't know anything about this. But she, my mother's still living, my parents are both still living, and my best friends and my mentors. And so I kind of made a deal with my mom. All right, we'll look into it. If you kind of help me, I'll see what it's all about, and I'm thinking the whole time, no worries. I'll never get accepted into an academy. The more I read about it, the more I was sure it was an easy deal with my parents because there's no way I get accepted. And then in March of my senior year of high school, my grandparents lived behind us. I get a call. I'm sitting in 12th grade English and the phone rings on the wall and my teacher, Mr. Smith, goes over and answers it. And he goes, okay, yeah. Hangs up the phone. He says, "Becky, you need to go to the principal's office." Now that was not unusual. Becky spent a lot of time in the principal's office at high school. So I go down there. My grandfather is standing there with this big brown envelope. And he says, "You got something from West Point." Well, I wasn't too excited because I got a lot of letters from West Point about you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to, but this one was 25 March 1977 that I got accepted into West Point. And if you could have ever seen fear appear on someone's face, I mean, I can remember like not feeling my hands and my feet and my legs and my arms. I'm going, oh my gosh, I've gotten accepted. Now I have to go, right? Because I can't say no. All these people apply and very few get selected. So off I went to West Point. And West Point built on the foundation that I already had, I think, in terms of values. It was a very hard 4 years. You can ask me about it, in the Q&A. I have no regrets. I'm with my path. I'm with my choice. I always tell everybody, but I wouldn't want to do it again. Like I wouldn't want to do it twice, right? I mean, I would do it again for a first time, but I wouldn't want to do it twice. Second class of women to go to West Point, and very hard. Like I still have every leader journal since 1977. And if you want to talk about that, we can too. I think journaling is very important for how we self-develop as a leader and we learn. And then also how we remember in reflection things that happen, because you can't remember it all. And it's been very helpful for what I do now in speaking on leadership. But what I discovered when I go back and look at there, like every day I said I wanted to quit. I mean, it was just hard. But my parents taught us that there are 2 rules to life. Rule number 1, don't quit. Rule number 2, refer back to rule number 1. And that helped me a lot in navigating very tough situations throughout my life and throughout my career. So then I spent 27 years in the military. I moved 18 times during that course of that. And what's kind of interesting, I finally went back in and looked at all my bosses. because I've decided that, I'm a product of all these different leaders that I was exposed to over time. So during COVID, I went back and I matrixed out all my different bosses. So a couple of interesting points. 51 different bosses in 27 years. Because the military structure is you have one person you work for that's called a rater, then you have an intermediate rater, and then you have a top boss. You don't always have the intermediate, but you always have the rater and the senior rater. And so I matrixed those out, 51 different bosses. I worked for two people twice, and all men. Because, women were kind of a novelty in the military during the decades that I was there. And I always tell everybody, I turned out okay. So it's leadership's not about male versus female, women versus men. It is about character and competence and what's on the inside. And so anyhow, so then I ended that career. I got out of the military and retired in 2008. I retired because I was ill. People always ask, why didn't I stay longer? Because I was on a really great trajectory. But I became ill, and my position was, if I'm going to say that leadership is about the lead, then I have to think about if I can no longer bring my absolute best to them, which you see on the slide, bring your whole self, bring your best, then I need to regroup and get well and figure this out. And I had a lot of people that said, don't do that, stay, just stay. I was being looked at for my second star, but I knew that I had peers left and right of me that were stronger and more capable and ready. And if I stay and I'm not up 100%, then I steal that from them. I take that away from them and their opportunity. So I retired in 2008, spent a year really getting kind of well. And then I started this work of speaking on leadership, mostly in the corporate sector. So we'll go to the next slide, please. So going back to the subject of leading with hope and emerging out of chaos, my most chaotic year in my military career was the year I spent in Iraq. Prior to that, I was commanding in Germany. I was a one-star general. I had about 3,000 people in Germany I was responsible for, a pretty significant mission. The year previous to that, I was a deputy commander. And during that time, we were going through the greatest transformation in the US military since World War II. Now think about that, right? We were reorganizing, we were changing the way we fight, which if you change the way you fight, you have to change the way you support the fight in terms of logistics. And we were right at the peak of changing all of our equipment, up-armoring our equipment, our technology with our computers, reorganizing all the way down to company level. And then I get told, we're going to move you from the position you're in. You're going to be a commanding general, and you're going to take an organization to Iraq, and you'll be the senior logistician in Iraq on the battlefield. And you'll go from roughly 3,000 people to 20,000, over 200 units, and 5,000 civilians. And I really had never had civilians in my organization before. These will be contract civilians, contractors on the battlefield. And you're going to do it during transformation, and you better get it right. And I can remember being in combat going, this doesn't seem like a good time to have more chaos, right? Because there's already a lot of chaos in combat. Like, it doesn't seem like this is a really good time to reorganize. But I think what we're seeing right now in our own time frame of our country and businesses is that COVID as a pandemic has forced many companies to have to reorganize, to transition to different ways of doing business. In some cases, still keep their business, but transition to a new product based on the manufacturing lines they have, right? I mean, think about it. One day they're making alcohol, and the next day they're making hand sanitation. But the most creative, I think, and the most that really say, look, I'm gonna be innovative. I'm not gonna give up. I'm not gonna quit. How can I change this to keep my people employed, to keep going? And as I was minimize chaos, right? So I cloned over there. I said, we're building the bridge as we cross it, because I have all these leaders, including myself, and it's easy to become a little bit overwhelmed because you go, I've never done this before. And I've certainly never done it while I'm being shot at, right, in combat. And you have it was the best year of my life, but it was the hardest year of my life, because there's nothing harder than losing your soldiers, and there's nothing harder than also the separation that you have from family. Now think about how many people are experiencing that now. I personally believe the military has so much to offer um, our civilian counterparts, because we know what it's like to deploy year after year after year and be separated from family, and how to make that work, and I mean, granted, we do still have a lot of high divorce rate, and unfortunately we have a high suicide rate, but we also have a lot of success rate. And so I really encourage uh, civilian organizations to reach out to military to help them help themselves get through these times, because we've learned a lot about resiliency. We've learned a lot about coping mechanisms and the value of team, even when you can't be together face to face. So at any rate, I really believe my responsibility, even in combat, was I needed to be calm. I needed to create calm with my folks. And so think about it, you know, first of all, 24-hour operations, 7 days a week. Now, I used to laugh because my friends would send me notes, like email notes, messages on a Friday night, and they'd say, have a good weekend. I'm like, oh, yeah, right. You have a good weekend. There are no weekends in combat, right? And I'm sure some people are feeling that way now with the virtual world. Is everybody knows you're home, so you're available. So there's like no weekends in the virtual world sometimes either. But I would just kind of let it go, because they don't really truly understand what it's like to be in combat. But I kind of kept track of my journey over there, and I can tell you that it was almost a full 6 months before I took a half a day, like a morning off. And I did go to chapel on Sundays, so I did take that hour and a half, and I would go on Sundays. But to take a full half day off, I was almost 6 months into the deployment. Um, the majority, 70% of our operations were at night. And so you have to change your whole sleep cycle and things like that. But also that meant our greatest tragedies happen at night. Our greatest chaos happened at night. And when you get a phone call in the middle of the night that a convoy has just been attacked, that we've just lost a few more soldiers, you just your emotions spin. You experience everything from great sadness to anger to what did we do wrong? What could we have done better? And each time I had to really take a tactical pause, even if it was just for a couple of seconds, and not drill my people like, well, where was it and what happened and what, because if I did that, if I responded that way, then I would just be causing more chaos. And the last thing we want to do as leaders is to create more chaos. Okay, let's go to the next slide, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So I really feel like, in building that bridge, it was so important that I led myself first. And I tell everybody, leadership is a choice. You're either choosing to do it or not to do it. And so I think you all are deciding that you're going to choose to lead, because you wouldn't be on a Friday morning joining us if you didn't think this was important. And in choosing to lead, the first person you have to lead is yourself, because everybody's going to figure it out. If you're demanding that of them, but you're not demanding it of yourself, it doesn't work. It's not very effective. And people go, well, yeah, but in the military, you just order everybody to do things, right? And I went, yeah, well, how does that work for your kids, right? Parents, they could order their kids all day long. And does that mean they turn out to be really good leaders? No. I never ran faster or worked harder because I had somebody yelling at me, by the way. But if I had someone who pulled up alongside of me and got really close to me and said, how's it going today, Halstead? You seem to be running a little slow. Is there something going on? I mean, I learned techniques from other leaders that brought me in, that helped me lean in to go like, wow, they're paying attention to me as a person. And when I would see that, I would replicate it, right? And throughout my rest of my career, we would run in formation a lot. And I would get out there early in the morning, 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, and I would run with my soldiers. And I'd run next to them, and I go, can you believe they pay us to do this? Like, I'd be all excited. They'd look at me like they're barely awake, going, she's a crazy woman. but I've tried to instill in them that it's about their attitude. This is good stuff. Let's release the endorphins, get a good workout, and then go do our mission. But it also did this for me. It helped me see my soldiers who needed help. Because when someone falls out of a formation, they have something going on in their life, either physically or mentally or spiritually. They have something going on in their life. So I always chose that soldier to run with. I'd pull back and I'd run next to them. And, I'd say, hey, what's going on? Why are you falling out of the formation? Because, that's not a good thing. And if they turned to talk to me and answer my question, sometimes I might smell a lot of alcohol, or maybe I smelled smoke, or maybe I saw anger, and then I could start to figure it out. And through that run, I would be able to say, look, we'll get you help. We'll get you, let's have you go talk to a chaplain. Let's have you go talk to, anybody to pull you out of this. But, and so often it was family problems that were driving some of their issues. My wife doesn't want me to be in the military anymore. Well, you keep falling out of formation, she'll get her wish, because you got to stay fit. So don't make stupid mistakes and find yourself no longer with a job, because she won't like that either. So maybe we get you some marriage counseling. This is the kind of thing. But it all starts with leading yourself. And the last thing I would always tell them, but don't fall out of formation. Don't set yourself up for failure, set yourself up for success. And so for me, part of setting myself up for success on a daily basis, just as a person, was understanding that discipline is so important. It is my number one value. I believe all of us should know, what are your top 5 values that guide and direct and lead you. For me, I say discipline, and I think most of you would translate that as self-discipline, right? I don't mean discipline like correct people or punish people. I mean discipline in terms of I could not be a person of integrity if I didn't have discipline, because it is too hard. I mean, too easy, I should say. It's too easy to choose, the harder wrong or the easier wrong over the harder right. I'm kind of twisting my words around here. It takes discipline to be a person of integrity. It takes discipline to be a person who does their work on time and shows up to a meeting on time and tracks their own personal battle rhythm, so they know when to be with family and when to work hard at work and how to take care of yourself physically. And so for me, I had kind of a routine that I did. In the military, we wear a uniform, we wear our dog tags. And I just started, especially in combat, because I think combat made me realize that I don't know if I have tomorrow, but I know I have today. So how am I going to ground myself to make sure that my soldiers get the best of me? So I started taking my dog tags, which we wear around our neck, and I would go work out first thing in the morning, come back to my little hooch, and I'd take my shower, and I would take my dog tags and look in the mirror. I'd hold them in my hand, and I would recite the warrior ethos, which you see on the slide. Always place the mission first, never accept defeat, never quit, never leave a fallen comrade. And that sounds very military, but let me tell you what, that applies to all of us, because we all have a mission. Raj has a mission when teaching her students, but she also has a mission with her family and her community, right? All of us have personal and professional missions. And then I would hold my shield of faith, because for me, that's very personal, but I share it because it is part of me. So my faith is very important. And then I would quote Joshua 1:9. And then I would just look in the mirror and I'd drape them over my head. And I'd look in the mirror and say, Becky, you need to go out and be the best person you can be today. I didn't say leader. I didn't say general. I said person. Because see, general is a title. General is a rank I wore in my uniform. What's most important is what's on the inside, not what's on the outside. So we'll go to the next slide, please. And so I believe that it's all about character and competence. It's about leading with your heart and your mind, right? That emotional intelligence and intellect. And I do believe that it's an art and a science, right? We have to practice both. There's a lot of science to leadership, but you're not just born a leader. People go, you got the gene. Isn't that nice? You were born a leader. I said, that's a cop out for you not leading yourself. Because let me tell you what, I have had to learn a lot about leadership in order to grow as a leader. So much of it can be learned. And if you don't believe that, just think about children. When children say things and everybody's shocked, like, oh my gosh, where did that come from? And then the child says, I heard you say it, right? Oh, okay. So, but I also believe struggle is good. And the reason why I believe struggle is good is because if you are struggling between your heart and your mind on how to lead or what decision to make, promote someone or don't promote someone, punish someone or don't punish someone, if you're using both and you're struggling between them, the good news is you're using both. I worked for some bosses who were incredibly intellectual, but they didn't care with their heart. But they were brilliant, and they were hard people to work for, because when you don't care about your people know that, and they don't want to stay. It ruined it. I do a lot with companies on retention. You want retention, you got to care about your people. So you need both. And if I can only have one, I'll choose character first, because I can help you on the competence side. But character is something you've really got to work on. This picture is of Sergeant Marshall, and he was my driver when I was a colonel. And we had gone from New York down to Louisiana, and we were in the field for 3 or 4 weeks. And then we were done. And during that time, you eat all Army food, and it's really horrible. Just by the way, they try their hardest. The military does to give you good food, but it's all in a brown plastic bag in a brown box, and it all looks brown all the time. So anyhow, we were getting ready to fly back to New York, and Sergeant Marshall said, "Ma'am, I'm going to go to Burger King. Can I pick you up some lunch before we get on the plane and fly back to New York?" I said, "Oh, that sounds great, Sergeant Marshall, because I love cheeseburgers. Just give me 2 plain cheeseburgers." So Sergeant Marshall looks at me and he goes, "Are you sure? Like, that's all you want?" I go, "That's all I want, dude. 2 plain cheeseburgers." So he asked me again. I said, "Sergeant Marshall, go to Burger King, pick up the food, get the lunch. Let's go, man. We got to go to the airport and fly." So he goes and he comes back. He picks me up. And of course, I get in the back seat and he's driving, and there's a young lieutenant up front. And he's a great driver. He's looking in the rearview mirror, seeing how I'm doing back there in the back seat. And I couldn't wait to dive in, man. I grabbed that Burger King bag, dove in there, unwrapped my cheeseburger, bit into it. And it was nasty. It was horrible. So I look at him in the rearview mirror, and he's looking at me. If I take the top off of it, there's nothing on that cheeseburger but a piece of meat and a piece of cheese. So I set it aside, and I choose the second one. I unwrap it, take the top off, look at it. Same thing. Piece of meat and a piece of cheese. I said, "Sergeant Marshall, there's absolutely nothing on these cheeseburgers but a piece of meat and a piece of cheese." He says, "Ma'am, I asked you 3 times. Are you sure all you wanted was 2 plain cheeseburgers?" Have you ever been in a situation where you are totally wrong, but you want desperately to be right? Like, he did give me what I asked for, but it's not what I want. So I said, "Sergeant Marshall," I said, "you were going to Burger King. All I meant was I didn't want a Whopper, a Junior, a King. I didn't want all that rabbit food, but I wanted condiments, man." And so his eyes are the size of 50-cent pieces. And I know he was like, I am dreading this drive and this flight back to New York, because she is not happy. And then I smiled and I said, "Sergeant Marshall, you know what? You gave me exactly what I asked for." So he started to smile. So not so fast. It's not what I wanted. So I'm still like, I'm not happy back here. But at that moment, something really happened between Sergeant Marshall and I. We already had a great respect for each other, but the respect even went up further. Why? Because I admitted I was the one that was wrong. And if I had not, and as a leader, sometimes people crush their people. I could have said, "How hard is it to get 2 plain cheeseburgers? Man, find me somebody that can help me out here." I could have crushed him. But if I had crushed him, that respect would have gone down. And what I think is so neat about the story is the respect didn't stay where it was. The respect actually increased because of the fact that I admitted I was wrong. And we kind of smiled about it and learned from it. And so about 5 years, I forget how many years later. Let's see. Yeah, 5 years later, I get a call from Sergeant Marshall. He says, "Ma'am, I hear you need a driver again." And I said, "I do. How did you know that?" "Well, I've been talking to the sergeant majors." And he says, I'm going to come to Germany and be your driver. He was in Italy. I said, "Oh, not so fast, Slick. You just got back from Afghanistan, and I cannot do that to Carrie and the kids." That's his wife. I said, "Because I'm headed to Iraq." "I know you're headed to Iraq, ma'am. I got all the details. Carrie's all excited. She's going to stay in Germany with the kids, and you and I are going to go to war together. Do you think he'd want to go to war together if on that day, something as simple as a cheeseburger, I had crushed him because things didn't go the right way? No way. So this is Sergeant Marshall and I, Christmas Day, going around and just wishing the soldiers a good day in combat on Christmas Day. And so, by the way, Raj, it's pretty funny. I tell the story because people love it. And then somebody wrote in the chat box, I can't believe you made him work on Christmas Day. I never thought about it before because we work every day in combat, right? So I said to the person, let me tell you this. I asked Sergeant Marshall, I'm going to be flying in the medevac helicopter, going all over to different bases all day long, just so that I can, extend good wishes to people. And I said, I can take one person with me. You're the first person I want to ask, and and he knew he could say no. He was so excited. Like, it was just a great way for him to spend Christmas Day. And by the way, we're still in touch. When I wrote my book, he said to me, is the cheeseburger story in the book? And I said, of course it's in the book. He said, how many times did you say that I asked you? Are you sure? I said, twice. He said, no, I asked you 3 times. And I said, okay, I'll edit the book for you. I'll change it to 3 times. He uses that story when he's training his soldiers. And I just think, see, we as leaders, we create the environment in which people are working in. And they're either going to learn in that environment and grow in that environment. And, oh, by the way, become your legacy. Let's go to the next slide, please. And I think a lot of this is all about attitude. It's really all about how we respond to situations and respond to people. I hear people say, well, I can't help it. I don't control that. Let me just help you out. You really control nothing in this world except your attitude. I mean, you don't control what goes right, what goes wrong, what happens to you today or doesn't happen to you today, but you control the response to anything that comes into your life. And if that's the one thing I get to control, then I decide I'm going to decide. Then I want to respond the best that I can. I want to be the best that I can be. In this picture, I am hugging a soldier, and when we were leaving Iraq, I could not hug all 20,000 people. There's no way. I mean, they have 55 different bases all over the country. But what I did tell my sergeant major, who's like my right-hand man, I said, for every soldier that leaves our base in Balad, if I am here and not out someplace else, and we're putting soldiers on the plane at the end of their year to go back home, if we're here, you and I are going out to the airfield and telling them thank you. He says, ma'am, you got to sleep sometime because all this would happen during that. I said, I have the rest of my life to sleep. We're going to go out there. If we're here, if we're present and we're here, we're going to go do that. And so we did. And my aide took this picture. Well, I had a young major approach me one day, and he says, I got a question for you, ma'am. And I said, okay. He says, how do you know that everybody that you say thank you to and you give a hug and put them on the plane deserved it? And I have to tell you, I was choking on my words because my initial response was going to be like, are you crazy? Right? Like, it was not going to be sometimes you got to keep your responses inside your head, by the way, till you figure out what you're going to say. My mother gave me a book called 3 Seconds. Totally recommend it. It says, if you wait 3 seconds before you respond, you'll be a lot happier with your response. So I had to think about it. And I said to him, I said, well, here's the deal. I don't know that they have earned a thank you for their entire year of all the things they did in their particular skill set. Maybe they have done some things right or wrong. I don't know. But here's what I do know. I know that they deserve a thank you for serving their nation for 1 full year as a volunteer and having departed their family and country to do that. And for that, I will thank every single one of them. And I kind of want to say, next question, please. But he said, he just, okay, all right, well, that makes sense, right? So we have to also remember, sometimes we have people around us that are challenging. We have situations that are challenging. We have people that are challenging. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Give credit where credit's due. There's goodness in everybody. There is potential in everybody. Granted, it is a little harder to get out of some people, but it is possible. And then just have a good to great mentality. I mean, I really wanted to enforce that with my soldiers on the battlefield. We need to be encouragers. Leaders, that's what they do. They encourage. And they reward and they do those sort of things. I sent a lot of handwritten notes to family members saying, thank you for supporting your soldier while we're over here. We couldn't do it without you. And we did heroes of the month and things like that. We have to recognize people, and we have to recognize the right people. And there's a lot of different ways to do it other than just promotions and pay benefits. But it's a mentality to say, I'm good, or our organization is good, but let's shift that to great. Because if you've ever read Jim Collins' book, the enemy of great is good. And too many people say, well, our government's good enough. Our school is good enough. My family's good enough. My church is good enough. You get the idea. If you accept good, you will never experience great, in my mind. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. And no matter how right you are, no matter how good you do or whatever, shift happens. Now, say that quickly. And my mother loves this slide. Shift happens. And this is a picture of what wrong looks like. This is not a good thing that happened in Iraq. Somebody did not tie that vehicle down correctly. Somebody did not inspect it. Whoever was driving the commercial truck was driving too fast, too close to the other truck, slammed on the brakes. But I was on my way to Baghdad when I saw this. And, I leaned in and I looked at the numbers on the bumper on the tailgate of that vehicle. And I think it says 311301. And my initial response was, whew, not my unit, not my vehicle. And how many of us do that, right? We see something happen along the roadside, in the office, at home, in the community, and we go, oh, glad that wasn't my child, or wasn't somebody that worked for me. And we just kind of wipe our forehead and then move on. I have issue with that because I believe that we owe it to stop and respond in some way. And it doesn't mean we have to own the problem, but we certainly need to set things into motion to make sure that never happens again. So I pulled off, even though I was on my way to a 3-star meeting, I pulled off to find out what's going on. Number one, just to make sure that there's nobody crushed between those vehicles. So I talked to you about my dog tags earlier, and let me just talk to you about dog tags again. When I left the military, when I left Iraq, I came home, I went to another job for 2 years. During those 2 years, I really struggled with, I had a list of all the names of my soldiers that had been killed, and I always kept it with me in my steno pad. But I somehow, it wasn't enough for me. And so I ended up getting dog tags and had engraved on line after line, multiple sides. And what I did is I took their rank, their name, and the date they were killed in Iraq, so that I could carry these with me all the time, because I don't wear my dog tags anymore, but now I carry these dog tags. Why do I do that? I do that, one, to honor them, right? To honor their lives, remember their families. But I also do it to remind myself that sometimes we're the enemy. Now, what do I mean by that? There are names on these dog tags that I really believe did not have to be here, because 2 soldiers were killed because the one soldier driving fell asleep and went crashing in to an embankment. And so you have to stop and really think about that. Now, this kid fell asleep, so we investigate everything, right? And you go, well, how many hours had he been driving? How many hours had been since he last slept? And so my point is this: it goes back to discipline, it goes back to obedience, it goes back to accountability. And when I think about, one of the soldiers on this list was a sergeant. He was the senior person in his vehicle, and they hit an improvised explosive device set by the enemy to kill them. It didn't kill them. Everybody walked away from the vehicle except for one person, and it was the sergeant. Why? Because he didn't put his seatbelt on. So here we have all these rules, and we have people that are supposed to enforce the rules, and when they don't, it costs lives. And it's no different than being on the manufacturing floor of a plant, and that's the reason why we have safety, we have risk analysis, we have quality control, because none of us should be carrying around dog tags with the names of people who could still be here if people were doing their job correctly. and demanding that others do their job correctly. And this sergeant was the senior person in that vehicle. He was the one who's supposed to make sure everybody is following the rules. Do you have your seatbelt on? Do you got your helmet on? Do you got your weapon locked and loaded? Because we're about to go into enemy territory. He decided he didn't need to wear that seatbelt. If he had, he'd have walked away. You know, and he was married and had 2 children. And you just don't want to be part of that what if. So you don't walk by mistakes. So we stopped at this and nobody was hurt. Nobody was killed. It was good. Figured out what the unit was, what they need to do. Because the following week, if I had been going to Baghdad and I saw the same thing, only the following week, if somebody had been hurt or killed, how could I forgive myself? I would have gone, oh, I should have stopped last week. You know, what if? Don't be part of the I wish I would have, could have, should have club. It's a big club. Don't be part of it. Take action, be part of the solution. Let's go to the next slide, please. And when you are part of that solution, Raj, I'll tie it back because you're an educator. I'll tie it back to the whole purpose and focus of this, which is when you do that, when you hold yourself accountable and you ask questions and you get into the details and you're demanding, there'll be less chaos. There'll be a greater ability to emerge out of situations because you're doing it so deliberately. Okay. So diversity is another great way to do this. We all think differently. I think of diversity as thinking differently. I know diversity is also about man and woman and different races and different faiths and different, but it's also education and work experiences. And, you know, it's really, to me, about thinking differently because of all those things. And when we bring that to the table, we have, I think, the greatest team. Now, if you look at just male versus female, we were not very diverse on this commanding generals of Iraq the year I was there, because my mother says I look like the little girl that ran to get in the picture. Okay. I was the only woman general, a commander over there. But if you look closer, I can show you that there's a Polish general, there's a Marine Corps general, there's an armor general, an air assault helicopter general, British general, Korean general. I am the only logistician in the picture. So there's much more diversity than meets the eye. And that's what we need to do. We need to think of diversity as thinking differently. And when we think differently, we have to have the courage to speak up. Sometimes chaos continues to pursue because people don't have the courage to speak up, get out of their comfort zone, and truly collaborate to come up with the best solution. And at the end of the day, it's not just about thinking differently, but it's also trusting those differences. And I'll admit, I got a lot of pushback from leaders who just didn't want to listen to me because they never had to work with a woman. There's one general in this picture. He wanted nothing to do with listening to me. He didn't want his logisticians working for me. And it was hard for the first 90 days in combat. You know, my 3-star general would call me every night, Becky, you know, he says he's got to have his logisticians back. He doesn't want you having them. I said, sir, has there been any mission failure? No, he can't say anything that's not happening, but he just wants them. I said, right, he just wants them because he used to have them. It's a control thing. We reorganized, he doesn't have them anymore, and he doesn't like that he lost that control. And I said, but that train left the station, sir, and we are tagged. We are responsible for figuring out this transformation for the military. So what I did is I said, but I'll offer you this, sir. I will study it with my people, my staff, and in all of our missions, we'll create vignettes and stories, and we'll look at what's better because of transformation and reorganization and what we still need to work on. And it was very telling. And I didn't realize when we were doing it, how that would change people as high as SecDef. When Secretary Rumsfeld visited us and we had to brief him and all these other politicians, it was amazing how our work at our lower staff level helped show and demonstrate just exactly how the reorganization was working or where it wasn't working and where we needed to improve. And I encourage this with people in the corporate sector. as they take on acquisitions and as they reorganize, that this is the mentality they have to have, is they need to be looking at what went right, what went wrong, and what did we learn so that we can go through this smoothly. Okay, let's go to the next slide, which is the last one. At the end of the day, I think the only way to emerge from these situations is leadership. If you go back to the premise of everybody has at least one person to lead, and that's yourself, we can make this happen. We can get through anything, but it starts with me first. But I do believe that leadership in the end isn't about me being successful. Leadership in the end is defining your success by how you make other people successful. It is leaving a legacy. You know, people will say, what was your greatest accomplishment in the military? And I know they're expecting me to say something like, oh, you know, first at this or some award or some, you know, and it's not. The greatest accomplishment for me was leaving a legacy. And I can't even tell you like how wonderful that is. I'm going to be going to a change of command in May between two generals. Those two generals were captains for me, company commanders for me, and they're switching command between each other. I am like a proud mama here, right? Because I know that they're part of my legacy. I know that I'm part of their journey, and that part of their leadership has been because of us helping each other and growing together. And so, and I really truly believe it's much more than success. It's shifting from success to significance. In other words, it's not just about getting the mission done. It's about when you use your success for others, that's about significance. And that's why I like this picture, because this is a colonel, an Iraqi colonel who we worked with. We had a lot of Iraqi counterparts that we worked with, and they have no women in their military. And I spent a lot of time with him in fuel, and a huge black market in fuel in Iraq. And, you know, at the end of the day, my last visit with him, he just wanted to thank me, and I wanted to thank him for this relationship that we had garnered. And he says, sit, wait. And he got up and he walked across the room and he took his Iraqi flag. He took it off a staff. He folded it, he kissed it, and he gave it to me. And, you know, like we had just tears rolling down our cheeks. And all I can tell you is this. Those were tears of emotion for each other, right? Heart to heart, that we're both soldiers for our countries. But it was emotion that you're in the right place doing the right thing for all the right reasons. And war isn't all just about, you know, killing people and killing the enemy. It's also about growing relationships and establishing the peace and taking things to the next level. And, you know, I don't know how much of a difference we made in the big picture, but in the smaller picture, I'm better because of him and he's better because of me. And that was just a truly magnificent moment. And I always wish for people that you can see the purpose in your life, right? Because it's really all about the purpose in your life. And that's what leadership gives you, I think. So the last slide is just the Q&A slide, but you can pop it up there if you want. And then I think the way we're going to do this is Paige, Raj, you're going to help moderate the questions. And I do believe in having a philosophy, as you know, Raj, a leader philosophy that I can go back to. What are my top values? And make sure, you know, I always call leader philosophy as that tool, which if I had a perfect day of leadership, I'd be doing all these things right. But there is no such thing as a perfect day of leadership. But it helps me also look at, oh, I need to work on this a little better. I do a lot of days I got to work on my attitude, right? And so it keeps me grounded in trying to bring my best to others.